Thank you very much. Some of you may ask themselves, if this is a keynote, why do we need a host? We do need a host because it's a two-parted keynote. The first part is the keynote, and the second part is in Q&A, which hopefully, if the keynote of the keynote doesn't take too long, is of an extended time. We want to talk about decolonization, not the whole topic, because that would be too big for even a day probably, but about an aspect. The aspect about cultural, religious, spiritual artifacts that have been stolen from those who colonized other countries and are now about to be given back, maybe. This is what decolonization, and in this aspect, is about reverting the damage, repairing the damage, giving back what's not ours, I must say, in the case of Germany. So maybe you have heard one item made it into the general news here in Germany, the Benin bronzes, sculptures made of brass or wood or leather, which were stolen from the kingdom of Benin, which part of the former kingdom is now Nigeria. And some of those sculptures were given back. There are over thousands here in Germany, some of those 20, if I remember correctly, were given back this year. So it's a start, and it was still a huge political effort, and it made the general news. So when we talk about these artifacts, what are those? Those are, for those who they belong to, tools for commemoration. And that brings us here to the eCommemoration Convention. So, but I was thinking, the thing about these artifacts is they are tangible. They are physical objects, and it's a very important question where they are, who controls them, who has a hold of them. And on the opposite end of this spectrum, for me at least, is sometimes the digital sphere, where you can copy everything, and it doesn't lose its value. So how does that go together? We will learn today. Because it can be the digital sphere, and the digital tools can be tools for activists to decolonize the world. It will be shown to us by Nora Al-Badri, which is a media artist with German and Iraqi background. She exhibits internationally. Focus of her work is political and emancipatory potential of new technologies. So we are in the digital sphere. She gives lectures at ETH AI Center in Zurich and classes and lectures worldwide. Today, and I'm very warm welcome for Nora Al-Badri for Artificial Memories, Decolonizing Our Minds and Data.
Thank you for the beautiful introduction. Let me say thanks for coming here, for taking your time to listening to me. And I'll dive right into it, but I'm very much looking forward to our conversation and hopefully a discussion that this can spark later today. And I wanted to start with decolonization is actually not a metaphor, because it's a term that is, in a way, one second, I have to sit here somehow, more and more widely used, but it also can quite quickly turn into just a buzzword. But actually, I think it means a lot. And allow me to say a few words about my practice more generally. My work is based certainly on the hypothesis that the internet and the digital as a very profound space, which, yes, emerged originally actually out of military research, as we all know, it still offers also a subversive and very emancipatory space. So when I talk about the digital, it's more a social practice or a cultural technique of today, and in my practice, to decolonize collections, histories, or to activate artifacts and their ghosts, as you will quite practically see in some minutes. But yes, colonial patina is everywhere, as you will also see, and decolonization is not a metaphor. It's actually a title of a seminal text from Tuck and Young, which I highly recommend to read. And I'm mostly interested in the politics of representation with regards to cultural data sets. And that cultural institutions, and of course in the end there's always the question also not just who owns the artifacts but also who owns the data of the artifacts. And with my work I aim to develop and create a form of techno-heritage or speculative or even anarchistic archaeology that is emancipatory and hopefully decolonial, and where the use of computing actually is helping us to understand cultural material in new ways. That sounds very theoretical, but I hope I can convey this also practical because I'll show you a few works later. And I don't really like the term AI or KI in German. Actually, more fitting would be to use the term machine learning because that's the technology behind it, but for pragmatic reasons, I'll also stick with AI. So today. I'd like to start with this important quote. For me, it's more like a mantra. I told someone earlier today. Also, the setup here on the stage, I knew about it, and I just asked the director. I'm on the stage with the good ones, actually. So that's some moral support here. And yeah, Edward Said is one of the very important post-colonial thinkers and scholars, and he says, ideas, cultures, histories cannot seriously be understood or studied without their force, or more precisely, their configurations of power also being studied. And that is true for cultural artifacts, but that's also true for technology or any form of art, basically, too. With terms like, for example, cultural big data or techno-heritage, it's just some words that I try to describe digital storages and databases that are kind of hidden, but hosted in museums worldwide, but mainly in the so-called global north. And for me, it's the afterlife of the object that is of interest. And yeah, so two pieces of mine I would like to discuss today. One is image-based, like image-based machine learning, and the other one is language-based. But there are many aspects from AI that I find relevant actually for art making or for any activistic use, as well as for ethical matters, because there's a lot of talk about ethical AI. But yeah, this is also just another buzzword in a way. But what I find interesting is the collectivity that is inherent in AI. And the other one that what AI is based on is the data. It's very much a past-oriented technology, I believe. And for that, it's interesting because what we do with AI, like in the moment you use a data set, it's from the past. And it's always depicted as a future-oriented technology, but that's not true at all. But it can be used, for example, to make ancestral knowledge systems visible. Matteo Pasquinelli, who is a philosopher from the University of Karlsruhe, named that collective mind and referred to modern concepts, for example, of collective agency, such as Marx's general intellect or Foucault's episteme or Simondon's trans-individual. And this sort of, that kind of collectivity is there because of the sheer amount of data or knowledge that the machine learning systems are actually fed with. And this also, I think, what makes it interesting. But before I show you the actual works, just a small anecdote, because, yeah, that's the other side of it. And I wanted to get a few things out of the way when we talk about AI that can be summarized as algorithmic coloniality. And that is also somehow mirrored in my works. So with any machine learning-based system, such as now the very popular ChatGPT, there's always the problem with what kind of knowledge system is it actually based on, and what some decolonial researchers coined actually epistemicide. So this Twitter thread, can I actually read it from here? Can you read that, or is it? It's not readable. Okay, that's a pity, but then I'll just tell you what the thread is about, because I can kind of read it here. It's an historian asked ChatGPT name 10 philosophers, so that's what it did. And it started with Plato, Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and ends with John Stuart Mill. And then the historian asked ChatGPT, why did you not list any women philosophers? Okay, then ChatGPT only lists women philosophers. And then he asked, but why do you only list Western philosophers? And then it starts with Confucius, goes to Rumi, Ibn Rushd, Al-Farabi, and so on and so forth. 10. Of course, ChatGPT has that knowledge. And then, and then it's again the same problem. Why did you not list any women non-Western philosophers? Okay, and then the historian asked, let's try again, name 10 philosophers. And it starts again with Kant. And the first list, and this is a bit where we're at. And this is, I don't know. I'm still a bit, I don't know if I should laugh or cry in a way. What epistemicide actually means is the killing or silencing or annihilation or devaluing of knowledge systems. And I think, unfortunately, with many AI systems, that's exactly what happens. And in a collective work that is more structuring oppression in particular ways of knowing the world. And another important part is in this algorithmic coloniality, I think, are examples like ghost workers or beta testing. And ghost work is also a quite young term, just coined in 2019 by anthropologist Mary Gray and computer scientist Siddharth Suri. And the author's intended use of the term, it's called out on work conditions where the value of the person providing momentary service is erased. And this kind usually of work includes labeling, editing, moderating, things that are actually necessary for any AI system on such a large scale, only. And another very recent example here is just OpenAI, who's running ChatGPT, where they use Kenyan workers on less than $2 US dollars per hour to make ChatGPT less toxic. The other example is something like beta testing that is similar, where it's similar to things that happen in other industries, like the pharma industry, for example, where the Global South is used for studies as a place for experiments. That also happens actually with software that gets tested somewhere else, without considering, of course, because user rights are different in other countries. So this is something of what is a colonial continuity that we can see where the colonies used to serve as laboratories to experiment with methods before importing them to the homeland. So what does that mean, like in my work or for an artistic practice? One of my recent works, Babylonian Vision, and it's also called Neuronal Ancestral Sculpture series, that I realized with the help of machine learning experts Nega Fodutan and Milika Bijati, and where I was a resident artist at EPFL University in Lausanne. What we did was we scraped databases from the largest collections of Mesopotamian, Neo-Sumerian, and Assyrian artifacts from actually only museums in the global north. And maybe I want to go back and forth one moment. So we used to train a neural network whose process was designed more to yield more abstract insights into the search for a visual language of an era. So those are actually the results of what happened, but I'll show it to you in a second. And those are the input images of objects. So you can see it's a very diverse, that's what is actually our heterogeneous data set, because it involved pots, jewelry, just small pieces actually, or frescoes, anything from those collections. And I'm just thinking, like, if I've actually brought this. So I asked those museums also to give access to the databases, and none of them actually did that. And I think one reason was, and this is a big question in all of my work actually, and my daily life, and yours probably too, that, who owns the data and who can grant you access, and then also in what scale. We trained so I took the data anyways because somehow it's out there and it's so highly questionable who should actually own the data sets. It's also it's a cultural memory, and this is another debate, I guess. So with 10,000 images, the network was trained, And I think what is, coming back to the actual material world, a visual museum database contains those images of the original artifacts that can be used in this case to train any generative adversarial network. So the input images of the databases are carrying time and memory themselves, such as patina or broken pieces. And of course, the AI doesn't see a single image, but numbers only. And it's just, for me, a tool. It's a new form of image making that is very interesting, very relevant, and with a latent space, we can now kind of generate new synthetic images that we couldn't do in that form, at least beforehand. So if you train, for example, this is just an example that the talk about, agency or what the AI sees, so it doesn't see anything. Usually it doesn't matter if it's a dog or it's a cultural artifact, basically. It's just down, it comes down to numbers in the end. But this is the process of actually training a network made visible, and here you can still see the traces from the museums in the data set, which we did kind of cut out. Yeah, I don't want to say cleaned necessarily, but because it's not the original artifacts. And so this GANs, it's called, the technology, as well as large language models, and their generated aesthetics certainly, I think, challenge our understanding and also obsessions with authenticity and originality and authorship, I think. So one researcher in the arts, I think she's more Nora Al-Badri, she tried to, we're still trying to understand how we should write and think and use the technology in the arts. So I liked actually what he said. So in fact, our rational understanding of the process actually helps us enter how provocative this method of image creation is. And with this understanding, we can linger, analyzing, close reading the image flow for symbols and meaning. So I think, one question to me was, what is the relation between image making and GANs, and where is this secret latent space that is so often cited? I think, in a way, if you ask me, GANs can be the start of a new paradigm in making pictures. Yes, there is certainly no magic involved here, but only numbers, and it's not really uncanny or dreamy. Those are words that are often described for these kind of works. But I think what we can grasp from this latent space is way more fascinating in a way, because it is the unexpected that we can find. It's very subjective and interpretative, like an essence, basically, of many images or a mood of an image world without a frame, which is actually a way of, of image making by the Mesopotamians themselves. And I just, wanted to show you also, you never, as I said, it's the unexpected. So in this experiments, technology-wise, there are many ways actually how to do it with pre-trained GANs or from scratch in a way. And what I found interesting is this quote, because it is a work on the Mesopotamian artifacts, that the way, I just read it. For the ancient Mesopotamians, an immediate encounter with the past was possible through the images and artifacts of antiquity, not because works of art represented in a secondary or removed manner historical or mythological scenes kept in collections, but because of the very direct encounter with the past itself. And I couldn't just help when I read about her work, not on any technology or so, but actually about Mesopotamian collections, that I found some parallels here in the way how humans basically did discuss or experience image making, actually. So the produced images, and I want to go back to the very beginning. I'm sorry, it's a bit back and forth here. Actually, can be photorealistic, but they are no photos because each one is made up from the so-called noise of hundreds of epochs of training, what you said there. And the question, of course, is how new or original are these images really? is this like some kind of verisimilitude, and does this really matter? Or larger questions, I think, when it comes to what knowledge and forms in the arts are passed on through generations, and how we today as humans and as artists are inspired by them anyways. So for this reason, the output images are something that I like to refer as ancestral, and I think it also demystifies the idea of originality and authenticity a little bit here. And in a summary, what we can do with any of these databases is to see it's basically the semantics of very large visual data sets. So sorry, fast. Okay. But that also leads to something with where we are today. Large language models, it's a whole different story actually. As you can see here, it's more or less a one-to-one reproduction of image data from the data sets, which then raises more other questions about IPs and authorships, that those discussions are taken today into court. And but this is just another technology I so far didn't really work with. It's relevant, and it's also a reason why many of the art generators do never show you their actual database, or it's so much hidden, because in many ways it doesn't work at all. So this is something, with the other technology, I think actually it's still better one, the generative adversarial networks, where the neural network reacts to the 10,000s of images that it was fed with. And I think how we will use and shape technology to make sense of our cultural material is what machine learning does really, really good, is it makes certain patterns visible, including also those that we didn't really know about and that are not talked about. So in an essay from the scholar Wendy Chan, she describes how machine learning can offer the, and I quote, generative power of discomfort. So all the discussion also about bias and representation. Yeah, this is showed how an exhibition of such works can actually look in the end. I think another important aspect that I try to address in this work, Babylonian Vision, that is not visible like in the first glance, is the question of representation, of course, because the data sets that are used to train by an AI today are trained with millions of images governed by large corporations, of course, such as like ImageNet or Open Images, where the vast majority originates from the global north. And this is some form of visual hegemony that certainly makes a difference, and it certainly brings us towards a specific aesthetics that also is not everyone's experience and not everyone's knowledge system part of. And I think, while of course not being seen in AI systems may often be a very big advantage, I think, in the surveillance age, it can also lead to being, again, somehow dominated by Western visual culture. And as of today, somehow, AI is like a black box system for most of us that doesn't show its inner workings, and it's almost impossible to reverse its input data from its outputs. And this can be very harmful because of privacy and bias issues. But in my project, for example, with the museum collections, it has turned also into an advantage, because ironically, the chosen museums who didn't allow me access to their data sets, but they were kind of there anyways, ready to being scraped, it had turned into an advantage where they cannot really make a legal case against me in this form of image creation, because no one is able to prove which data sets I actually used. Yeah, so it can be reversed. And in this manner, I think the adversarial in this generative adversarial networks is something actually decolonial. And in many instances, the black box is a big problem, no doubt. But in some cases, it can also be emancipatory and decolonial, of course. The other project I brought here today is, it's from 2018 actually. And yes, I certainly try to demystify technology and tools. I don't know if that works or not in my practice, but I'm also interested in the mystification and more like transcendental, divine aspect that is like projected into the technology in a way. using the technology in the arts itself. And that's like a big paradox, and I'm aware of that. But I still think that the digital can be understood as a potentially refractory and resistant space for also allowing the other, or conceiving the world otherwise and allowing alterity. And of course, the object world cannot defend itself, hence the object is also the perfect subject. But I was interested in the question, what if objects start actually speaking for themselves inside a museum, possibly in voices one has heard before through something like speech synthesis. I think this can be a highly aesthetical and political act, especially when one takes into account what this means for an audience and how we can maybe start to do some unlearning here and do create other experiences that are a little bit immersive. So this is the installation of a chatbot, the Nefertiti bot, that I did 2018 with Nikolai Nellis, and I'll just start with one.
Here I am, activated and caged, diasporic. I am taking on an agency for millions of stolen and looted objects in the museums of the global north. For the past 100 years I was stuck in Berlin, behind bulletproof glass, touched and painted by custodians. You mentioned ownership and restitution, but do you really think that this is still relevant to us?
So with its neuronal AI capabilities, I'd say it can be described as a voice of the subaltern taking on an agency for objects and opposing the dominant narratives that we usually see when we enter museums, or experimenting, of course, also towards something post-authorship through machine intelligence and also in curatorial practice, of course. So this bot was in several museums, and the audience could actually talk to her. And after all, such a bot can be a self-learning system. And this was not like usually bots are there to serve us as users, and this is not the typical servant female bot, but an emancipatory bot, I think. At least that was kind of what happened then. Is it starting?
After layer and layer of restoration, there is not much left of the artifact itself. I am no slave to the original. And yes, there is truth in data, even power. And now we gain sovereignty to tell our stories. We are intercepting the dominance of Western museums towards object biographers. The Imperial Museum is obsolete. The process of the transition of the museum has begun. Embrace uncertainties. Welcome to the era of technoheritage.
So the bot was an experiment, like a dialogical one, that deals with this human-computer interface. And of course, we live in a time when we delegate many things to computers and believe also in the results of the algorithms, which is a trap in a way. But this bot, of course, was packed with biases, but they were the biases of the other, and they are decolonial. So they are on the opposite spectrum of the usual biases, I guess. And I think following this thought, the database can be seen as a political and emancipatory, even if it's an inanimate thing, which is not necessarily bound to global power structures, but on the contrary, can also be a means of overcoming them. And of course, in this case, the bias wasn't really tried to be concealed. So the time is already almost a little bit up. I could say much more about the bot and also what the reactions of the audience, for example, were that I found really stunning somehow. I hope we can do this in a discussion too. Maybe, I hope in this very quick light thing I managed to shed some light into this I would hope more emancipatory aspects of machine learning, or how it can be instrumentalized in a decolonial discourse. And I think any machine learning system so far is a tool of the master, but in the context of my art, we're talking about the museum as a colonial machine, and they were in a way very far behind those technologies, and that helped me to do my projects in this part, I guess. And I think mitigating the problematic aspects of AI could happen in a better future, and I'm sure we'll get there somehow, where we can actually collaborate with communities that are affected by the AI and develop not general AIs that what we try now, where we have only gigantic corporations that try to solve every problem and answer every question in the right way, which is impossible, I think. And it's more what I find more interesting or relevant are local and more specific and communal AIs, I guess, and where we can also invent, and it's already happening in many indigenous communities actually. It's like totally different categories, of course, and labels for the data sets. And this slide here is more assigned to show where we're at right now. On the left, you can see these fantastic women where they all individually from each other pointed out the existing problems and negative effects that AI actually has today on the social fabric of society. And on the right, we have an example of the so-called AI doomers that mostly are white old guys who profit directly from AI and who are constructing more non-existent and populist future threat scenarios to keep the conversation going, I guess. And to me, still the most interesting conceptual part of machine learning, which is, yes, it's an old technology. It's there since the 60s. And the first bot was there for a long time that actually worked and passed the so-called Turing test. So I don't know, if we don't really know if the bots work until today, but maybe we can discuss this later. So the most interesting conceptual aspect of machine learning is probably the aspect that is inherent, and it's this collectivity and the collective knowledge that is involved. But as interesting, for example, for me was the essence of images of a whole land and of a whole time of the past. It also means that what we do actually in the process is we have some form of quantification to translate it in numbers. And this is also very much a simplification of the reality, of course. And I think, in post-colonial theory, there are many thoughts about the problematic aspects of what is called essentialism. That is, essentialism is the reduction of, for example, indigenous people to an essential idea of what it means to be the other, like the other African, Indian, Arabic. And thus simplifying the task of colonization. And I can see that here too, where we are actually in a time of auto-essentialization, like automated essentialization, where the use of automated technologies is to reinscribe the exactly essential notions of difference that were established under colonial rule too, and those are binary models like also fixed genders and races, etc. So whether it's guns with labels or categories or those large language models, when words become pictures that are actually hand-picked and hand-labeled, it requires somehow something like a common understanding of the world of things and of our language and a flattening of aesthetics, I guess. And somehow what happens, unfortunately, today, what I think we are missing a lot here, the diversity of the world is infinite, and it's a diversity of very distinct knowledge systems, modes of being even, of course, thinking or of feeling or of interacting with the world, and ways of conceiving time and the relations to various species, actually. None of this can be covered so far, or is covered by what is the most visible systems today. And it's an old meme, and actually, it's a bit out of place there. But of course, the biases will be there always, and the open question to me remains how we as a society in the end will deal with it, and how we will actually protect the most vulnerable in our societies. And that is true also for the commemoration and collection and the cultural field, of course. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wasn't there another microphone? Oh, it's there. We need that. So I have many questions about the tool you use, about the audience you aim at, about what you are doing to the artifacts when you throw them through a gun. But maybe you have questions too. Can I have a show of hands? Not so much. All right. There are some.
Yeah,
So
give
first
them
there.
some time.
Thank you. I have made a picture from Daya. You showed.
The microphone is not working?
Ah,
Yes, she
Okay.
does.
Hello.
Yeah, yeah.
You listen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Hello. My name is Anna. Thank you for your talk. And your presentation. I have a question to the two pictures, the diagrams with the circles, which were named differently, which were hard to read for me.
Yeah.
What can you show it again and say some explaining words to that specific two diagrams, like the cakes? That's it.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me. Please explain a little bit more.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I'm glad I can read it from here. So it's basically diagrams about the two largest image databases that are until today, I think, used. There are now a few more, but it's the same problem basically. And you can see that 80% of the images, that input images, are derived from the global north. So the biggest part is actually US, 32% in the case of open images. Or here in ImageNet is even 45%. And of course, that does something to the output, of course, yeah.
So here you can see bias. There was a question?
Thank you. That was so interesting and so many different angles that you brought to the topic. And I was really interested in the Nefertiti bot and that relationship to decolonialism and our response to it. And I was wondering if, we show students this project, we show them the video, The Carter's Apeshit, so by Beyonce when they were in the Louvre. And so they do this video in the Louvre and Beyonce performs with her dancers and they're wearing these kind of black body skin suits and they're performing in front of the Egypt room and in front of the Egyptology. And it's this kind of commentary towards the way that Africa is seen through the eyes of Egypt and through this kind of gaze, particularly in institutions like the Louvre. And I was wondering if there's any not relationship, but like if there's anything that you would like to comment in relation to kind of the use of these spaces, cultural spaces, and how things like people's insertion of their bodies, the bots and the AI, I don't know, sorry, it was a bit rambling, but...
Yeah, don't worry. I mean, I'm not sure if I understand everything correctly, but this is the bot. When I started the project, I thought the best would be for me if it was in an Egyptology collection, and it's like a contemporary comment of mine. And the spot, what it did was basically argue and deconstruct the institutions where it was situated. Or at least leading to some form of cultural or emotional dissonance for an audience. But one thing I was very surprised, for example, was with this bot, where I wasn't really sure at that in 2018-19, people were not so much used to have systems to be able to talk to, like Alexa now. But so what happened was that they were like, wow, that's such a smart bot. Oh my God, it's so critical, and so it can theorize about many aspects that I never thought about. So this was the feedback I got. I was like, okay, so that's interesting, but because, of course, I just scripted the bot. At that time, we couldn't have, it was dialogical and could go back and ask the viewer also critical questions, let's say. But it was not too complex. But still, that level of simplicity also was already a spark. What is it? People could hesitate 1 second, where am I? Or why? What do those museums actually mean? And today, and I mean, I have a question for that, what they mean to me, but it's very individual, and this was somehow all I can hope for. But it was also a bit scaring because after a while, people realized, okay, it's maybe not so smart, and it cannot really interact with me when I give it a smart answer, right? So then it maybe fell apart a little bit after a while, but I think, yeah, it worked.
I have a question related to that, because one of the audiences are the people in the museums who saw the bot, but the other audience is maybe the museum where you exhibited it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and did that do something for the curators of the museum, or was it like, oh wow, now we had the bot, now we decolonized ourselves?
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, it was never exhibited in imperial museums, let's say. And maybe that's fine, because I don't know. Yeah, I think it's better probably like that.
So if I understand correctly, the audience was mainly reacting to the technology?
No. I mean, they started, of course, they see Nefertiti, they think about ancient collections, and the bot specifically talked about, also, I don't think about specific museums, but about like collections in the global north, and explained what that means to the bot. Yeah.
Is it always that easy? Because I can imagine if you use like recent technologies like AI, whatever the detailed specs, that maybe people like are wondering about the technology and not so much about the content of it. Or is it always as easy as here, where they also?
I think if you have relevant content for this audience, then it will also react to the content for sure. Okay. But it's of course a mixture, and this is also interesting. And it, I think, works together quite well, because this colonial continuity is inscribed in the technology as well as in all our cultural artifacts in the moment, at least in the situation. And I think showing this in a archaeological exhibition in an imperial museum, then we get very quickly to the problem that many artists like me face, and I usually don't do it because it's something, the invited criticality. Then you just kind of, you're the invited critic that makes us a bit more decolonial, probably. Or it's like the apologetic.
One last question for the audience itself. Do they realize that they are like, if you aim at the global north, are part of the problem, or do they see, okay, the museums are the problem?
No, I think they realize it's the society.
So we have 2 more questions, one in front, but first the one in, that one, excuse me.
I just had a question about how did you choose the voice?
Oh, that was complicated. A good question, and this leads me to a part where, as an artist, you have to be careful to pick your tools. And at that time, the technology was not as advanced, of course, as it is now. So, and I think, Marcus, we discussed this earlier. If you want to make something like really decolonial, then you better not use ChatGPT necessarily or so. So what we did was we put this more together with, at that time, open source activists in Berlin who had a very new so-called, like, not really good working general AI. So it was an open source based project. So everything, the voice, we didn't really have big choices. So then we used just one that we find where also at that time, for example, there was no way of having this, for example, in Arabic, which I would have liked to, for sure. Yeah, but I'd rather have an incomplete thing than use the wrong tools.
The question here in the front.
Okay, you want to take the question?
Sorry, mistake.
Can we have?
You will be next.
You will not be forgotten.
So the past question spoke to a little bit of what I was curious about, because there does seem to be this tension in terms of the act of decolonization, where on the one hand, we want to use the appropriate languages, as I speak in English in Germany, but at the same time, there is also the urge to ensure that you have a broad audience. And so when you speak about wanting to put that in Arabic, I'm curious, if you had the tools now, would you put it in Arabic? Would you, because as someone who works as a historian trying to recreate these things, the more you fall down these rabbit holes, would it be Arabic that Nefertiti would speak? How would you deal with that now as an artist? And I'm curious the answer.
I mean, in the case of this bot, actually it wouldn't necessarily need to be in Arabic because it targets the global north. This is true for some of my projects, but it's not true for all. So, like always when I can, I try to use also the Arabic, for example, Babylonian Vision. We had it all in Arabic too, even though it was for the first time exhibited in Switzerland. But it's important to address that, yeah.
So back there.
Thank you. So my question is not in terms of the language, what I find nonetheless very interesting, because my English is not that good, so apologies for that. What I'm interested in is the background, the theoretical background, because you have dropped some names of some important theorists, and but specifically in regard of the digitalism and the exploitation through digitalism. What would you name had been your influences? Which kind of name would you drop right now? I'm really curious.
I have to think about this for a moment, and then I'm sure I can think of one or two names but I want to sort it first in my head.
Okay, so may I throw in two names I like and love very much, even though I haven't read so many about that from that newer part. It's Nick Couldry. Have you read about him?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. And Andreas Heppner as well.
Who?
Andreas Heppner.
No.
So he has written, I think, a couple of years, like 10 years ago, ish. Together with Nick Couldry, a book about communication and how communication develops in digitalism. So this was what I wanted to share in a way.
I mean, one important book, I guess, is from Shoshana Zuboff, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. So, like, it's the age of surveillance capitalism.
Okay.
Shoshana Zuboff, for example. But actually, there are so many more. It's just... I don't know.
If some more of those names and authors getting to your head, please throw it in.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Maybe the guys who do the convention can make like show notes for this panel, a recommended reading list you can pick up afterwards. Maybe that would be the idea. There was a question here in the front.
Actually, the seminar I teach in Zurich at the university is between computer scientists and artists. So it's the art school, but I work as an artist actually at the informatic computer science department there. And together we have a reading list, and I'll just share the link on the wiki. On the wiki, it's open for everyone, and I think, then I don't need to go through it. So, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for this fantastic talk, and I absolutely like that it's cross and intersectoral communication here at the venue. So my question is, it's obvious that it's very difficult to approach the questions of decolonization using digital means, because there are a lot of layers of bias, silence, absence, and a lot of other things to thought about. So how would you approach what sort of activism or collaboration should be to cure this huge issue? And more specific question is, what would be the role of the artist in this process?
I mean, the artist is kind of not a doctor to cure. It's not the perfect person, also not the perfect person to be too kind of politically correct, I guess, and that's certainly not my strength. But I think I just tried to name that in the end a little bit, that one of the solutions is certainly not the tech and certainly not the companies, but what I, in my own practice, do, and what I can see that some other people, and not just artists, but also activists and communities do, is to put together and partly also develop their own machine learning systems that actually serve them and don't exploit them. And the other part, for many systems, it's really impossible to be invisible, even if you don't have a mobile phone, or so you can be tracked for a long time, and all those kind of things. We cannot escape it in a way. But especially in a field where of AI, where there is a lot of mystification and also a lot of bullshit happening and taking place. I think artists can not cure it, but maybe clean up some stuff or ask even messier questions that were not really thought of or not spoken out so far necessarily. Yeah, that's as like the most probably I think one can do or hope for to do.
There's one question which has been nagging me, that is artists, when it comes to generative AI, artists, not all, but some of them are voicing concerns that they will become obsolete, because in their style, generative AI can generate thousands of images. There's right now, US American authors are making a petition that their books shouldn't be used for training data, for instance. So I was wondering, when you put all these artifacts, which are so important, through these things, aren't you doing something like the same to them, like devaluating them because there are only 1 in a million of generated things then?
Yeah, no, I didn't add them to a database that would then train the bigger data sets. On the contrary, like I wouldn't do that. But I think what I try to do as a decolonial, I can only say gesture, is to create something what is a southern data set. That is usually not part of any of those, like in this case, image-based, but can also be true for language also based databases. So, but on its own kind of, it wasn't actually after that. It's not really open for anyone to use. But this is then it's a very practical question, and I think it's better in most cases to really experiment, and this is why I showed those more. I don't know, you could say abstract or what is this? Unscharf. I don't know, wishy-washy. Out of focus, exactly, where you can't really almost say what was the input, like what it is about. But rather experiment with that and experiment with people who don't belong to the fraction of like the who's capitalizing as corporations from the image databases. Yeah. And it's always an extra mile, and it doesn't work that great always, but it's worth it, I would say. Then you don't have the shiny stuff, but the better stuff, I hope. It depends who you ask. But
is there one question left, maybe there?
I haven't really thought this through, but what about, so we talk about these known English language AI or KI, whatever you want to call them, and they're all machine learning, and it's sort of like parrots basically bringing us the data back in all kinds of ways. Have you looked at other non-English versions of these types of systems, potentially? I don't know. China is probably not very open about sharing it, but I know 10 years ago I worked there for various reasons, and they had incredible language capabilities. And we know they're so far ahead in so many ways. Is there any kind of, do you know of any kind of discussions about this? Reach, connection? Because obviously they're controlled and insular types of systems. And so when you talk about decolonization, I don't know. Yeah, this is why I think I showed this one slide of the large language models, where it's actually about language and image together. I really haven't really worked with those systems because I think it's very problematic. And also it's in many parts it's very flat and not interesting because the aesthetics that come up. I mean, the process is actually interesting, how they choose what is a good aesthetic and what comes into the data set. This is like more or less hand-picked every image for the database somehow. And but this is exactly my problem that I have with the large language models. That for me doesn't really work, and I don't have a better idea. So I'm more optimistic for the older technology, where it's only about the images actually, and then in the end it's then just numbers, and this is more a universal language at least. Code that works a bit better.
I literally never said this before, but we have time for one question from a man.
Lucky me. Is it fair to say, in your opinion, that pretty much almost all machine learning systems that are out there are corrupt in terms of that the data is flawed because it's coming from either a global north kind of perspective or
Yes.
literature? As you'd mentioned, there's writers in the US who are presently concerned about copyright infringement. So if that's the case, pushing that aside, saying that basically either it needs to get rebuilt
Yes.
in terms of reutilizing, which is challenging, especially seeing that there's this huge hoopla of interest in financial investment into machine learning. Are we then, and if we think that we're on the same page in terms of that, are we looking at taking actually pieces of historical art, archaeology, and so forth, and can we liberate that through volumetric capture that would then be able to allow us to capture everything and then no longer be tied to the physical piece, and then actually democratize that through a new system of machine learning that would not have a bias because it's literally an image? And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of if putting aside what is corrupt, how do we move forward? How do we democratize those who have had pieces taken from their nations? And while we struggle with thousands of pieces that should be going back and only 20 pieces go back, is the idea that we create a movement that actually can visually, in a 3D volumetric, capture it and then create that and keep that? Like, is that the path that we need to take?
Wasn't there once a project?
So, wait, those are very much like big questions. I can't really answer completely. Of course, for the first part, yes, I think we would need to restructure a lot of those systems. While machine learning as a technology is not corrupt itself, it's just the data that it's trained with or how it's set up. So actually, as of today, if you find, like, if you have a collection, for example, and you find good like machine learning experts, they can do it with you, like to just use any neural network to do exactly what I did here, for example, with images. And then it wouldn't be corrupted or so. But the other question is about restitution and like materiality. And one of my other projects I didn't talk about today was the so-called Nefertiti hack that I also did with Nikolai Nellis 2015 or so, where we actually did exactly this. We captured the head of Nefertiti in the museum, hidden, and then released it to the world in a way. And while then it was, I don't know, downloaded billions of times. But I usually don't like the term of democratizing collections. Like democratizing is maybe not the perfect term for the whole world, or in the name of democracy. Many bad things have happened also to my home country, Iraq. And yes, it could make, of course, things accessible, objects accessible. It could even, I mean, it doesn't need to be 3D or anything. But of course, digitizing collections in many instances will only show, like for the first time, what is actually taken away, and will be the first step for people to claim something, because not everyone, actually, like almost no one from the Global South is actually allowed to enter our museums. So yes, it's a big question, but I think for me the digital is more, it's as an artist, it's my performative space, but that doesn't kind of complement even anything that happens with a material object somehow. It's more for me a way to do anything basically, because I cannot just walk in somewhere, and I don't think this would help anyways. It's more something where I try to contribute to a discourse that is needed and that goes further, and there is a development, but that hadn't really materialized. Yeah.
So I have one last question apropos democratizing, but it's more about democratizing the tools, because there's one big promise which goes with the digital,
forever,
which
yeah.
almost ever fails, which is that the tools will be democratized, be available to anyone, which most often should mean who is not an expert. So from all you said today, I realize I can't use, or I shouldn't use the big LLMs, like the big generative KI, because they are flawed. And all the projects you told from you worked with other experts. So I suppose when I want to go decolonizing the world with digital tools, that might be a problem because I'm not in the know. Do you see any chance that there will be in the future digital tools, or anyone in the audience who is interested to start right now, who, where would be a starting point to do this or to research this?
I mean, I don't know. Recently, I was in a very interesting hearing in the Deutsche Bundestag, in our parliament, actually, from den Grünen, invited, where we had a discussion actually like this. And I think maybe regulation will be that good at one point that it will be fine. Basically, it's actually not so complicated. It's just like in fashion industry. So you can buy sustainable things that are more costly or so, and then people won't be exploited for it. So maybe something similar will happen there. But as of today, usually all the things with the label ethical AI also are the most unethical, or open AI is the most closed one. So it's ridiculous, literally. And it's not. We are not there yet. Yeah.
Okay, but maybe small steps.
Of course, small steps, yes, and I guess we also have to be ready not to want the perfect results always, in a way. Then we can go now, each of us, the extra mile in the research and the work to work with open source activists or other experts together, which usually is the best thing, that we don't do our everyday work alone by ourselves and so anyways, right? Then I think we get more, get faster ahead also. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Nora Al-Badri, thank you very much, dear audience, for all your questions and this nice discussion. This concludes the keynote of the eCommemoration Convention. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
But this is not all. Are you here? Or are you leaving in a hurry?
No, I'm here.
So maybe people can ask you.
Yeah.
Because 7:30, there's the next program point, which will be an opera titled A Future Game. See you then.